Yeah, and so in her opening statement, Katie did mention the PFAS crisis that took place in the last few years in Wausau, and sort of on that note, how can Wausau respond effectively to environmental problems such as water contamination while balancing the cost to residents? And I ask that question because in a number of interviews with candidates, I've come across the message that people are upset about the increase in their water rates over the last few years, and I see that that's partially as a result of having to deal with PFAS in the water. So I'm just wondering about how to balance dealing with these environmental concerns while also thinking about the cost to residents.
Yeah, I think it's really important.
I'm sorry. Actually, we're going to switch each time. So Doug, I'm going to have you go first, and then Katie, you'll go first the next time.
Okay. I think the key word in that question was partially responsible. So we all, I think we acknowledge that there's certain things did happen. We had to spend money on, but there are things that are low hanging fruit. For example, the pilot payment, which is a hidden tax, is known as a payment in lieu of taxes. That's on your water bill. It's roughly 18% or about $2 million that the city is taking, essentially taxing the utility for purposes other than water. So if you think you're just paying your water bill, you're wrong. You're putting more toward other city services. So that's low hanging fruit. And what's interesting is that if you read the Wausau or you read the various interviews from council candidates, they all seem to be getting on board now with trying to bring down or eliminate the pilot payment. It's resonating with residents. So the unfortunate part of that is, to a person, they were all against it 6 months ago when we were talking about it in the budget. We had two cracks at it. In fact, one was offered by D3 Alder, who suggested we take it to zero. And I think, recognize that we don't want to shock the system. So we didn't pass that. But I offered maybe a more easier way to whittle it down, maybe 100,000 a year, and we'd be clipping in 15 years 1.5 million. We might be able to review that year to year and maybe make it even less. So what we want to do is reduce the upward pressure, which we already see. We have staffing shortfalls right now. In order to bump those up, we're going to have to either raise the rates or find a way to cover it within the operating budget of the utility.
Okay, and Katie?
Yeah, so what also happened during that discussion at the budget was that the council unanimously agreed that they wanted to revisit this pilot payment, but they didn't want to do it right then on the floor. They said, bring us the data, bring us the information on how we can make a thoughtful decision instead of being surprised by this. So I think that's a really important thing, that we've all agreed that by August, we'll have a plan together, at least the financing, to look at what we can do to ratchet that down. I think it's also important to note that it's not just the utility that does pay a pilot. There are some other organizations around town and municipally kind of worked on organizations that pay a pilot payment to the city too. So I have a feeling that once we address this utility one, we're probably going to be asked by these other organizations, hey, why should we do this? We're doing the same thing. You're taxing us. So we do need to think through what that looks like. But I will also say, we haven't had the opportunity, at least I didn't, I don't think the Alder did, really to weigh in on the project as it relates to building the new drinking water for treatment facility and the sewer upgrades. And again, those are very necessary. I think 4 years ago, I was sitting in the challenger seat saying, you know what, I'm not so sure if we need to do this. I think we should make sure we're working with the DNR. Well, you know what happened? I've been working with the DNR. And they said, this is really critical. You need these upgrades. And that's where the majority of that rate increase comes from. It's a $44 million project. The PFAS remediation is $17.5 million. We did get an earmark from Tammy Baldwin's office. We're really glad about that. And we'll continue working on gathering more streams of revenue to help pay some of this off. The lawsuits are part of that. We are able to capitalize on the remediation efforts. So I'm looking forward to a time when we have that first settlement in our hands so that we can start talking about what we want to do with those dollars. the back in the day when we had the Holtz-Krause landfill remediation, the council at that time decided to put that in a fund where they would address environmental concerns. And we've been able to draw on that fund to address some environmental concerns across the city. So I think that's probably the opportunity here for us now, is to get those dollars in hand, have a thoughtful debate about how we want to spend those dollars, and make sure that we're doing it in the best interest of our community. I think it will make a difference once we have those dollars and once we're able to kind of reassess the financial situation. I think that's at the point when we can start talking about a new rate case.
Okay, and then we can go back and forth for a little bit. The floor is open.
Well, and I think that's a conversation we have had, and we punted on the PFAS settlement money. So let's commit now to take that settlement money toward rates and rate reduction and debt reduction. So rather than putting it into a segregated fund for someone else to decide later, let's send that signal today. Let's go back to the pilot again, and let's talk about my amendment was very small, because not only are we trying to reduce it in real dollars for people, but we're also looking, what a message we would have sent. We hear you. We're making an effort. We've taken a notch down, and we're going to look at it next year and next year and next year. So let's take some steps in the messaging to our constituents as well. And it's interesting that the mayor discussed the DNR, because we've got several situations here in the city on city-owned property where we've bucked back against the DNR. So if it doesn't suit our message, so for example, the Cleveland Avenue, we tried to dodge having to do further investigation there because of a court ruling that maybe gave us a little wiggle room where we wouldn't have to potentially do it because it hasn't been well defined yet. But it really shouldn't take us, and I think the DNR's position is it shouldn't relieve us completely of that duty, and we should continue to march forward with that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up, but I'm going to not talk about that right this second. I will say that when it comes to the PFAS settlement dollars, we don't have it in a segregated fund because we don't have the dollars. We don't have the dollars, so there is no segregated fund. Or as the attack ads on me said, a slush fund. There's no slush fund. So just so everyone's clear, we don't have the dollars yet. The settlement hasn't happened. We're still involved in several other lawsuits related to PFAS. But when it comes to Cleveland Avenue, I think this is part of the discussion that we're having as a council. We need to decide what to do. And given the data and every bit of information, which I think the council deserves to decide how we want to move forward. And I think that's what you're seeing, is you're seeing the regulatory body kind of figuring out how to move forward with this court case. I know they're appealing it. So this is going to be something that we need to continue to discuss. We don't have any groundwater regulations, and that's another reason we should probably be thinking about how we want to spend those dollars when it comes to PFAS settlement. We don't have groundwater regulations. We don't have surface water, and we're going to have to talk about soil. So we got to make sure that we are thinking through how we want to use those dollars the most appropriately, and it does include having council policy body discussions.
I would agree. We have to have that discussion. I think we have had some discussion in that regard. At least what is our overriding philosophy on when we get these settlements? And I didn't use the word slush fund, but it's an apparent non-slush fund, I guess, because we don't have it dedicated if we do get it. So at some point we should at least have an understanding with our residents what we want to do and which way we want to go with it. And I can give you one more example on the DNR, or actually it was the DHS. We had, again, city-owned property. It was a park in one of the one of the census tracts where we used the environmental justice to basically jimmy in this pre-baked lead service line replacement plan in the hollow, which is the neighborhood which also contains Riverside Park. So when we had the opportunity as a city to post certain locations where the DHS asked us to for possible toxicity that could be harming people, and that was a fairly well-used park with families and kids. It took weeks it took weeks before, I mean, I don't know where the letter was, but it was in City Hall, let's say, until District 3 Alder got a hold of me and asked me if I could help cut through some red tape. So, you know, cutting through bureaucracy at the lowest level is probably just as important to cutting through bureaucracy at the higher level and trying to bring things down the pike. Let's help citizens at the most local level in as much as we can. And there's a case where it was a simple matter of me getting a hold of the letter, finding out what they wanted to say, getting it into the sign shop, getting the right print, getting it in there, and getting it posted. It took about 36 hours to make that happen. Easy.
Yeah, I'm glad that we had the signs up for the 2 weeks before the remediation actually occurred. And that's something that can easily be asked for. You know, I stopped getting emails from folks who are a little bit more excited about those issues a while ago, but obviously willing to work with folks. So it's great when we have people who come together and want to get something done. But I don't necessarily think that that's the most pressing issue every single day. You could talk directly to our directors on what they need to get it done, and you did. Good work.
Okay.
Thank you. And you know, and I would agree. It could very well look trivial to the outsider here looking in, but I think what we do in anything is what we will potentially do in everything. So it meant something to that neighborhood. In the grand scheme of it, is it going to? You know, I would agree with you. It was 2 weeks, but it was 2 weeks, and it was something that was requested by the DHS. So I would say we shouldn't have taken the shortcut. It was like $50 a sign, and you know, I drove them over. You know, it was no big deal. So
I just want to let you know I'm not trivializing it.
No.
I do thank you for this, and I do think that sometimes it's helpful when you reach out to the executive of the city to help get this stuff done. So
Okay.